They don't have to be the best in terms of quality. They only have to be the best in terms of value. And that is really what matters for DX users. I was going on with my usual day at work. And then during lunchtime, I was greeted by a couple of new lens announcements from Nikon for APS-C, for DX cameras. And I was so surprised by how random this announcement was. Just that, after going through the details of these two new lenses from Nikon, which is the new 16 to 50mm f2.8 DX and the 35 1.7 DX MC, I feel like Nikon has made the correct choices over here when it comes to releasing new lenses for crop sensor cameras like the Nikon Z50 Mark II or the ZFC. So let's talk about it. And hi, I'm Steven from X Crew Guiding Photos, just a hobbyist photographer, but I also do freelance work at times. I'm mostly a studio photographer, though I dabble in street photography and a few other genres. Anyways, back to the topic on hand for today's video, which was something unplanned. I wasn't planning for this video. I'm a busy person. I have already went through the technical details and the pricing of these two lenses in advance. And the most impressive thing about these two lenses over here is that from a strategy standpoint, I have to say I'm impressed by how Nikon addressed both my complaints and also other people's complaints when it comes to DX lenses in general, or the DX system in general. I have a pretty unpopular opinion that I have always stuck to all these years for the past decade. I personally think that professional APS-C lenses are completely unnecessary because we are getting to a price point where they are so expensive that you are better off buying a full frame lens and using it on APS-C. And many people disagree with these viewpoints of mine simply because full frame lenses are more expensive, bigger and heavier. Well, the bigger and heavier part is correct, but more expensive, not really. So if you look at Sony or Fujifilm's 16 to 55 f2.8 professional APS-C lens, those are going for $1,300 US, I think. And that is before tariffs. I think it is more expensive today. What can you buy with $1,300 US when it comes to lenses? You can actually buy a Sigma Art 24 to 70 f2.8. You can buy a Tamron 28 to 35 2.8 G2, which is even cheaper, roughly $900. So if I can purchase a full frame zoom lens at the $1,000 price point, why would I pay the same amount or higher for a DX zoom lens? And with this logic alone, I have never felt like a premium DX zoom is a good idea. Of course, if you put a 24-70 full frame on a DX camera, you're getting like 42 to 105 millimeters. It is not the same. You're cropping in, you're losing the wide end, but you add on another wide angle zoom, which is DX only. That is how I would solve the problem. With DX, I would buy an ultra wide zoom, and then everything else I would buy full frame lenses. That is how I do things, right? Because I care about value. For the $800 and up price range, the way I see it, we are getting to a very sensitive price point where you can actually purchase very good full frame lenses, zoom or prime. So what Nikon has done over here, the 16 to 52.8 DX VR, it has vibration reduction, is going for $899. $900 brand new, which is still an amount that I would not pay for a DX lens. But this is most likely to be the price after the US tariff. And that would mean the price in places like China or Japan would be closer to $700. Like, this is a very reasonable price. Not to mention, it comes with VR. The Sony and the Fuji 16 to 55 does not have optical stabilization. This one has it for less money. So even if this lens is not the sharpest ever, it is not as sharp as the Sony version, it does not matter at all. Because APS-C users, they are price sensitive. Most people will go for a cheaper one compared to an expensive one, even if the expensive one is slightly better in image quality, because the whole point of buying DX is to buy cheap, because full frame is pretty expensive. And that is the message I got from asking a few people around. So I visit anime conventions a lot. cosplay photographers are everywhere, hundreds of them, and I have asked so many people, if money is no object, would you buy full frame? An incredible 8 to 9 people out of every 10 people I asked said, yes, I would buy full frame if I had money. So this solidifies my point about overpriced DX lenses are kind of ridiculous. $1,300, $1,400 for a DX zoom lens, even if it is professional, it is a very niche market. Like those of you in the US, in the UK, you make a lot of money. Maybe it is a small amount to you, but on the other side of the planet, it is a lot of money for a lens that does not cover the full frame sensor. So by not making this 60 to 52.8 a professional lens, not giving it S-line, not making it the best, they can offer a very competitive price, and that would likely to drive more sales. So this is incredibly smart. And also, since this is not the highest end glass you're getting, it means that the lens is smaller and lighter. 330 grams for a 2.8 zoom. And I would regard this to be better than the Sigma 18 to 50, simply because it starts at 16. I'm so sick of zoom lenses that start at 28mm. I want 24mm equivalent, so this is the one I would go for, even if I may be adapting the Sigma 18 to 50 right now. Now moving on to the next lens over here, the 35 1.7 DX lens. Initially, I was shocked by the price, $450 officially. Even with tariffs, it is still very overpriced, because how are you going to compete with the Viltrox Air 35 1.7, which is less than $200 over here? And then I read the press release again. I missed out one important piece of detail, and that is macro. MC. It is a macro lens. So this is basically the DX version of the 50 f2.8 macro for full frame. I have two different ways of looking at this. So that macro capability is going to make this lens so versatile, so useful, that it is actually a good purchase over the Viltrox Air if you care about close focusing ability. Nikon called this a macro lens and gave it a MC badge, even if the magnification ratio is 0.67 times, because that is at 35mm. If you factor in equivalence at 52.5mm, the magnification ratio is 1x. Okay, fine. You may say that that is not real macro, right? But Fujifilm has been doing it forever. Canon as well. Fujifilm 60mm 2.8. They have a 60mm macro that is called a macro, even though the magnification is 0.5 times. And Canon RF 85 f2, they call it a macro, even though it is 0.5 times. So when the entire industry is doing it, you have to do the same thing. If you don't, you are at a disadvantage. If Nikon did not label this lens as a macro and marketed it as a 35 1.7, this would end up as their worst selling lens perhaps, because people will inevitably compare it to the Viltrox and choose to buy the Viltrox because this is twice as expensive, more than twice. But if Nikon markets this as a macro lens, can focus way closer, then this is a completely different lens. You can't compare it to any Chinese lens out there. As good as the Chinese brands are, they are still incapable of making macro lenses that can autofocus even by today. Not even Laowa. Laowa has a macro lens coming 180mm, but if you want to get closer than 1x, no AF, manual only. So this lens, there is still a legitimate reason to get it. But my advice would be to buy the 52.8. Because that lens came out a while ago, the price has fallen. You can get the 52.8 for roughly $500. Of course, this does not apply to Americans with the tariffs, but the 52.8 can be found for $500 brand new if you look around hard enough. And at 50mm, you're going to get a bit more working distance, which is great for macro. You won't be obstructing any light sources. But of course, that is also not the best choice if you care about a lens that is internally focusing. The 52.8, the front extends out when you focus closer, so not great. And the next thing would be a 35mm or 50mm equivalent in full frame would be a more versatile lens, a more useful lens for daily use. You can take it out for street photography and then you can do macro as well. It's way more versatile. So maybe wait until the price falls a little bit before buying it. Do not pay full MSRP price of $449. If it falls to $350, $370, then that is the time to pick up one of these. So I think that making a traditional 35mm DX lens into a macro lens and labeling it as a macro, as a MC, is a very important and smart move, because nowadays people look at price, and number two, people do not read. I've seen people pushing a door that has a pull label on it. I've seen people not reading instructions or manuals after buying a new product. Things like that, people do not read. So I will not expect people to read the spec sheet of a lens and figure out what the minimum focusing distance is, what the magnification ratio is. Most people do not read that. So to label it as a macro and making it very clear from the get-go is very important. With these two lenses over here, the Nikon DX lineup is looking a lot better. It is not a big lineup, but there are so many Chinese lenses out there for you to choose from for normal primes. So I don't think that Nikon should be adding more prime lenses to the DX lineup. Leave the 1.4, 1.2s to the Chinese. They cannot compete on price points, right? What is the point of making maybe a 50 1.2 DX for $700 and then a Chinese brand would come up with one for $400? There is no point. So what Nikon should be making next? The last two lenses that Nikons need on DX would be an ultra-wide zoom, maybe a 9-16 f2.8 VR, at VR if they can, and maybe a longer zoom, 16-80 f2.8, and Nikon does not really need to do much more for the DX lens lineup. The last question would be, is this a sign that a professional Z500, a true D500 replacement is coming? You see, Nikon is now very focused on video. That is their priority right now. So most likely, anything that is related to APS-C, even more so a professional APS-C body, is probably at the back of the queue in terms of how important it is, how big of a priority it is. But it does not necessarily mean that they don't intend to make one ever. I personally believe that it is just a matter of time. Maybe you are in for a long wait, but I do think that a higher-end DX body with IBs may be coming soon in the future. Just that we don't know how long we will be waiting, because as you guys know, video is the biggest thing right now. So that is their main focus. So these are my own thoughts on these two new DX lenses from Nikon. From a strategical standpoint, very smart products, which won't be threatened by Chinese lenses anytime soon. Yeah. And they don't have to be the best in terms of quality. They only have to be the best in terms of value, and that is really what matters for DX users. So what are your thoughts on these two new lenses over here? Especially if you are a Nikon user, please do share it with me down in the comments below. And thanks a lot for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed it, please do give this video a like and subscribe to this channel for more camera, gear, and photography content. And until then, I will see you soon. Goodbye.